What is up, you guys? Glitchiz here, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm bringing you the long anticipated upgraded hunter build for the Frozen Frontier update. A lot of people were asking for this video as well. Again, I will be making updated builds for all the major classes. A lot of you previously saw my wizard build, and I will say before I get into the details of this video that I lied to you guys. The hunter is by far, at least for the dragon boss, the new reigning champion. My wizard build was phenomenal. The eternal lightning spell worked amazing on filling the stun bar and taking down that dragon in sub 5 minutes. However, with the build I'm bringing you guys today with the hunter and the combinations of perks that we're taking, I was able to take down the dragon normal difficulty, no added modifiers, in less than 3 minutes and 30 seconds. It is insanely fast and crazy how much damage this build does, especially against flying enemies, and the dragon is considered a flying enemy. We've also weaved in some dagger stuff, so I'm excited to show that off a little bit as well. But without any further ado, let's jump right into it. I will say that, again, this video might be a little bit longer, so same way that I did with my wizard build, I'm going to put timestamps down in the description breaking this video up so you guys can skip to each part a little bit more quickly. So feel free to check that out. And I will also be putting a link, probably the first link in the description, a link to the cheat sheet for our web UI with the entire skill tree for this build laid out, which you can zoom out on and see a lot more easily than seeing it in game. So once you guys watch this video and want to go back and look at the skills to kind of build it yourself, make sure to check that link. It'll help you out and allow you to do it a little bit faster instead of watching my individual video demonstration one by one again. So be sure to check that out as well. But let's jump right in. And the first thing I want to talk about is the armor. So if we go over here, the helmet that I decided to run with is the Alpine Antler Hood. This will give 14% critical strike damage and 16% ranged critical strike chance for when we're using our bow, as well as 2 frost resistance. I know I mentioned it in my wizard build, but one thing you're going to run into in the Albanese Summits territories in this new update is the frost mechanic. If your armor doesn't have high enough frost resistance, especially in the later areas, you can die almost instantly to hypothermia. Thankfully, with the armor that we are going to be using this build, your resistance should be high enough to where you almost never have to worry about that, so keep that in mind. Moving on to the chest piece, we've got a familiar one here. I'm using the Mountains Shadow chest again. This is actually a warrior chest piece. This gives another nice chunk to stamina, 30 stamina, as well as 300 health, so a big boost for our health there, and another 4 frost resistance. Moving on to the gloves, we have an alternate option for this. The main one that I typically use is the Alpine Antler gloves. This will give plus 8% range damage, as well as another 15% bonus against flying foes. Obviously really good against the dragon, and another frost resistance. One alternate piece that I would recommend you build if you want to spec a little bit more into daggers is going to be the Frostbite Slasher gloves. This will give 23% more dagger damage, as well as 3% backstabbing damage. And if you stun the dragon, one thing you can do is we're taking the grapple perk, which allows you to grapple right on top of the dragon's back. And if you're not using your bow, or you run out of ammo and are panic situation, you can grapple onto his back, whip out your daggers, and these gloves can do additional damage there. So that is an alternative option. What you're going to notice, especially in the damage test video, is that with the bow and arrow we're using and the perks that we're taking, the bow is just way too strong against a flying enemy. The dragon just happens to be a flying boss, so we don't really use our daggers too much against the dragon boss. But some of the other bosses that we might run into down the road, or even in the lower areas that won't get that flying damage buff, your daggers would be a good alternative to take them down. So that's why I spec'd into that as well. So that is the alternative glove option. Moving on to the pants, best option in my opinion is the Alpine Antler trousers. This will give a flat 22 stamina, as well as 1 sprint speed to allow us to run around a little bit more quickly, and 2 more frost resistance. There is one other pair that has less flat stamina. I think it's only like 12 stamina, but you get a bunch more stamina regen. Personally, I like having the stamina straight up. I think that's better, and 22 is a pretty hefty amount, so that's why I think these pants are better. And then last but not least, for the boots, I run the Trailblazer boots. This is from a different set. This has +4 stamina regeneration and a huge -700 stamina regeneration delay, so you almost never have to worry about running out of stamina with this build. The second, for whatever reason, in the rare instance that you do run out, that 700 delay almost immediately has your stamina bar recharging right away again, really, really fast. So you recharge your stamina almost infinitely, and then another 2 frost resistance to round out the build. So a really good combination of armor there. Moving on to the rings, I honestly don't change these at all. I run similar to my wizard build, the double ring of the ancients. The amount that you get from these attributes is just way too good when you have +2 to each of them. The dexterity is going to give us 10% more range damage. Spirit is 40 more mana. Constitution, 2 points of Constitution is going to be 100 more health and 40 more endurance. You could, in theory, if you don't have the maxed out build yet, run the excellent stamina ring for more stamina. But honestly, with all of the armor that we're running and the food we're going to be taking, you have so much stamina that I've almost never run out. So I've never really needed to use a stamina ring. I know a lot of people in their hunter builds use that, but personally, I think the benefits you get from the ancient rings are going to be better in this instance because all of our other bases are covered with our consumables and our armor. So I almost never switch these rings out. That's what I would just recommend using all the time personally. For the shield, we actually don't need to worry about this. When you're using the daggers, you don't use a shield, so you can equip one, but it's actually not going to do anything. I jokingly threw on the ghostly shield for 10% more fire resistance, but even when you have it equipped, if you go to your attributes and go to protection, you'll notice that we actually don't get that 10% buff. It only works when you have the shield out, and because we're never going to be using a shield with daggers and a bow, we pretty much just throw this slot away. So not a big deal here. You can throw anything you want in there. We're just not going to use it. For the bows, there is 2 in particular that I would recommend. The best damage bow, in my opinion, is the new upgraded ignited bow. If we go over here, it has 3 +7 fire magic damage perks, as well as Head Seeker, which will give us 5 stamina regen if we get a headshot, and Recharge, which will give us 1 health regen to help us stay alive a little bit longer. The other really good alternative bow that you can use is actually the new Avalanche Starter. This has 2 damage perks, one being +7 piercing damage, so good against armored enemies, and +7 ice damage, which will be good against pretty much all the normal enemies that you would run across in the Albanese Summit's territory, because for those of you that don't know, all the raiders, all of the whelplings and things like that in that new Frozen Frontier update zone are weak to frost damage, so having the additional ice magic damage will make this bow do a little bit more. It also has Brutal for increased critical hit damage, Enduring for increased stamina regeneration, and Health Leech for more health regen whenever you get a hit. So not a bad all-around bow as well, and I typically run this one, at least in the newer zone when I'm just exploring and running around. If I'm bossing and things like that, I definitely run the ignited bow though. But moving on to ammunition, moving on to the daggers, there's 2 in particular that I would recommend. If you're running around fighting normal enemies, the best in slot, in my opinion, is going to be the Oathbreaker. This has 3 +10 fire magic damage perks, so it has the max damage of any daggers in the game, +2 retaliation bonuses, which will deal 20% of the incoming damage to you in close quarters back to the enemy. So that actually is 40% damage with this particular weapon. So really good for close quarters combat. That being said, against wild animals and beasts, what I would recommend using is actually the crystal knives. This has a little bit less in raw damage output, but it has double poisoned blade perks. I know a lot of you wanted me to try and spec into poison, which is what we did in this build. And there's some perks that we're going to be taking in our skill tree that are really going to enhance the dot damage that we do with these blades. So you might not see the big damage numbers up front, but the amount of damage over time that you're going to do against enemies with larger health pools will actually out DPS DPS the Oathbreakers. So medium-sized enemies and bosses, I would definitely use these daggers. They're going to do more damage in the long run with all the poison that we're going to be doing. It also has health leech on it for more health regeneration and increased backstab damage by 20% with vicious, and sneak attack for more sneak attack damage. So if you're sneaking around in a new encampment, or if you get a stun on an enemy like the dragon, for example, you're able to time your lineups a little bit and get behind enemies when they're stunned and do a ton more damage with backstab. We're actually speccing in on the skill tree into more backstab damage as well. So between all of the perks that we're taking against larger enemies, these crystal knives will out DPS the Oathbreakers. So a really good secondary choice for those scenarios. I bring all 4 of those on my hotbar at any given time. Moving on to ammunition. There's really only 3 for this update that I typically use, and then 2 one-offs that I bring for specific scenarios. The 2 main ones that I run are the new obsidian arrows and steel arrows. Steel arrows being the best. You could technically run the steel poisoned arrows, but the poison on the steel arrows only works against wild animals and wild beasts. So it's few and far between which enemy types are going to actually take the extra damage from those arrows. So the steel arrows are just easier to craft, and you can actually farm them in the Hollowed Halls location that I made a video for the legendary farm. So it's a great place to stock up on those. The other big and important arrow that we're going to want to craft is the stun arrow. This is where I lied to you guys. The Eternal Chain Lightning spell, very, very good at stunning the enemies, especially the dragon boss. And it's probably still better for larger groups of enemies when you want to stun big packs. However, for single targets, at least with the multi-shot perk that we're going to be taking, and all the dexterity that we have, the stun arrows do outperform the Eternal Chain Lightning spell on single targets. And you're really going to see that during the demo when I fight the dragon at the end. You burn him down and fill his stun meter insanely quick with these stun arrows because of how much dexterity we're going to have. And by the way, it does scale with dexterity, as it says in the tooltip, which will have 29 dexterity with all of our buffs combined. So insane amount of stun that you get from these, and you can shoot 3 of them at once. So crazy good secondary arrow to take there. And then the 2 one-offs that I take for specific scenarios is going to be the giant bone arrow. This is specifically used whenever you're clearing out Hollowed Halls. All of these skeletons and skeleton enemies that you fight within the Hollowed Halls are weak to blunt damage, and the giant bone arrow is the only arrow that is fully blunt damage. So these, even though they have a slightly lower base damage, will actually do more damage against the skeletons than, say, like an obsidian arrow. So it's a good, cheap alternative arrow to bring for those particular areas. And then lastly, we have our Eternal Frost arrow. You get this in the hut in the older area. I shouldn't have zoomed out. Right here at the hermit camp, you just climb the rafters in this older area, and you'll see the frost arrows leaning on a bench. You grab that, and that's how you unlock the basically crafting blueprint for those. And you only need them once, obviously. Actually, I don't even think you craft them. You just pick them up there, and then you have them, and you just keep them forever. But moving on. Yeah, and that would be the last arrow type. So that is our ammunition. Moving on to consumables. The ones that I would recommend bringing is your best in slot mana and health potions. Mana, you're really only going to need for your gliding and for your eternal frost arrows that we're going to be using against lower level enemies. So you don't need these as much. Healing potions, obviously, they're always good to take. I also bring improved bandages. I mentioned this in my wizard build video. This is good for mitigating the fire tick damage during the dragon fight and any other dot type damage that you would take where you're not fully down to nothing in health and don't want to waste a full potion. You can pop these and just do some healing over time. I also run the Wisp of Light. You can also use the Flare Arrow. I just am not a big fan of it. I think the Wisp of Light is just easier, and you can find and farm these all over the place. And then for the Shroud stuff, we have the Greater Shroud Survival Flask for another 4 minutes. For damage perks, this is a little bit different. In one of them, you can't actually see. Right here, we have the Elixir. This is just going to be a flat 30% damage multiplier. However, the other buff that I would recommend trying to grab, at least before going against like a boss or something like that, is actually the Voka melee scroll buff, and you can get them from the center points of all the different Vaka camps. We actually have one right near where I built my base on the Pillars of Creation. It's going to be right down here in this little Vaka area here. You can just glide down really quick. And these little mushroom-looking rocks over here, you just glide right down on top of them. And then you're going to see the buff altar right past the entrance. So it's right here. So you would just go ahead and grab that. That would give us the buff. Of course I get stunned. Leave me alone. Trying to talk here. Let's head on back to base. And then what that Vaka buff does, once we spawn in here, is it gives us 25 more health and 20% bonus melee damage. So this Vakar buff is basically the equivalent of that Prayer of the Flame scroll for wizards. It gives you more melee damage. This does work with your melee damage from daggers. However, when we go over the skill tree, there are some interesting things I found about how damage is calculated with daggers in particular. So know that this works for melee damage in general with daggers, but some of the other points like strength doesn't, and I'll explain that in a bit. So that is all of the consumable items and potions. For food items, as you'll notice, we have 4 to choose from. The ones that I like to use personally are going to be, let's actually quickly run over to my farm here. And you'll notice we have 4 food items now. One perk that we will be taking is the metabolism one that allows us to have an extra food slot. So the first one that I really like to take is going to be the stir-fried vegetables. This is great because it gives us 5 dexterity. So this is our main dexterity food item and what is considered our vegetable slot. You will be able to eat all 4 of the food items I'm going to recommend. So big 45-minute 5 dexterity buff there. And that takes corn cob, forest beets, and tomatoes, as well as spice and bell peppers, all older materials that you can farm up pretty easily with saffron and things like that. So I have my farm set up to have all of those ready to go. You can get seedlings for all of that stuff. Moving on. The second option that I like to take for the meat slot is going to be the chicken soup. This gives another dexterity as well as 4 constitution for more health. This one, again, takes all of the older crafting materials that we can farm very easily and get seedlings for. Water you can get from your fountains. Raw bird meat, you just kill the birds and you get a bunch of those. So really easy ingredients for that one. The next one that is really good and new to the Frozen Frontier update is going to be the milkshake. This one is amazing because it gives +5 endurance, +5 stamina recharge, and another 4 dexterity. The recipe for this one requires strawberries, which we already know about, as well as snow and frizzy goat milk. Snow, super easy to get. Just mine any snowy area or something that has snow on it, and you'll be able to farm up that. It's one of the easiest things to get in the new Albany Summits area. And then frizzy goat milk. I talked about this in my wizard build video as well. You get this from the frizzy goats. Ideally, what I would recommend you do is craft the bait for the frizzy goats and then find them. They're scattered all over the place in the Albany Summits territories. There's several goat farms that you can find where there's like 4 or 5 of these things around. And I would tame probably 2 or 3 of them and then put them in your own personal farm because as long as they're fed and kept healthy, you can interact with them every 1 to 2 minutes and they will have 2 to 3 of these frizzy goat milks available per goat. So you can get these super quick if you tame a few of them and just keep them in constant supply. So that is how you get that. And then the 4th and final food item that I would recommend is going to be the pumpkin soup. We used this in the wizard build as well. This takes pumpkins, which can be farmed from the pumpkin patches. There's 3 of them in the new Albany Summits territory. One is going to be just northwest of the Howling Peak right here, called the Pumpkin Patch. Just a little southwest of that one is another one called Pretty Patty's Pumpkin Farm. And then farther south of Pretty Patty's, just north of the Elixir production site and west of the Fairfield Goat Farm and ancient Albany Summit Spire, we have another place called the Vinebrook Farm. This has the most pumpkin seeds and pumpkins of any of those 3 locations. It's got a ton of them there. So between those 3 locations, you can get pumpkin very, very quickly. The other ingredient that is required is going to be the same frizzy goat milk, purple berries, and then a new yellow flowered weed called the gentian plant. You can find seedlings for this and eventually farm it in your own, but to get the initial few, I guess I can show off the same route that I showed in my wizard build. You're just going to want to spawn at the Albaneve Summit's fast travel. So let's go ahead and do that. And then once you spawn in, you're going to want to head east, and the area we're farming for at least the initial few to start building up our personal farm are going to be all along this little hill here, and they start spawning about halfway up. So you just glide on down. And you should see your first one about halfway up this hill. So here we are, and there it is. There's the first one. And then from here, you're just going to weave back and forth up this hill to grab a bunch more. We've got one right here. There's a little patch. I'll try not to miss it this time. About a couple feet up. I think it's probably right around here. Where a nice little bunch of like 2 or 3 of them grow right next to each other. Where are you? It's over here more. Or maybe it's further up and I'm going to miss it again. We got one in the middle of the road just before the enemy encampment. Now, where are you? I always miss this one random little platform. Is it further down? There it is. So it's 2 levels down. I always miss it. But there's going to be 3 more here. And then from here, you're going to just run up the center path. Couldn't find that same location in my last video too. It always eludes me for some reason. It's like just further down than the other ones. I don't know why that guy's bugging out. But we got another one right here. A little further up. We'll have one right here. And then last but not least, once you get to the top, you're going to want to jump across this river. There's going to be a bunch more over here. Immediately turn around. You've got 4 of them right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I could have sworn there was some in the middle here that I flew over last time, but I may be mistaken. Ah, here it is. We had one on this hill. I think that's it for the top level. And then from here, you would just drop down. Because there's a couple more up on this ledge. Right here. So there's a gentian root there. So be sure to grab that. So right out the gate, we're sitting at 14. That's more than enough to head back to base and start setting up your farm. So let's head back now. And by the way, I'm avoiding zooming out on this mini-map because there's bugs right now. Where it starts lagging really bad and it can actually freeze my recording, so bear with me. There's a reason why I'm not zooming out on the map. Let's head back to our food guy. I think that might have been the last ingredient. Yeah, frizzy goat milk from the same goats and the gentian. Obviously, everything else from here would be up to you. We're not taking the perk that increases the quality of sweets, so don't expect any bonuses from that. You can technically use the grilled yucca fruit. That's considered a sweet, and it's decent for a nice chunk of stamina regen. You could use the fruit bowl. These are going to be like lesser quality secondary options, so that's totally up to you. But to reiterate, the best in slot 4 items that I would recommend is going to be the pumpkin soup, the milkshake, the stir-fried vegetables, and the chicken soup for the max stats, max dexterity, and things like that. So that is all of the consumables. And then last but not least, we have the skills. That's the most important part. And here we are. So right out the gate, I want to put a bunch of damage into backstab and poison and things like that. So I take backstab and sneak attack for the few times we use our daggers. That'll give bonus damage there. Can also do bonus damage against the dragon if you line up properly, as well as the giant slayer hook. This is good against medium to large air enemies to pull yourself towards them. On the dragon, you can literally pull yourself right on top of its back when it's stunned to do the critical hits on its little gem on its back as well. So that's one strategy you can do. So I like taking that for different scenarios. But in the assassin tree, take the point in dexterity followed by airborne and updraft, so we get better efficiency with our glider. Another point in endurance, and then sniper. When attacking with a ranged weapon, your critical hit chance is increased by 10%. So a nice chunk of bonus crit chance with our bow and arrow. Vitality surge, dealing a critical strike with a ranged weapon restores 5 stamina. Blessed arrows, when scoring a critical hit with a bow, you generate 20 mana. This will really only help out with our gliding and our eternal frost arrows. Another point in dexterity, followed by bounty bonanza and ricochet. Honestly, we won't really use these that much. Because we're not typically going to be running explosive arrows, but we're grabbing them in order to pick up graceful stride. You will gain 1 dexterity for every 2 levels of flame. Ideally, this is supposed to give you 4 extra points at max level because the flame altar can now be upgraded to level 8. However, I noticed this, or didn't notice this rather, in my wizard build. This is still bugged. Before, you used to not get any points, but now it's only maxing out at 3 for some reason. And I don't know if that's been mentioned anywhere that I haven't seen before, but if according to this tooltip, we should be getting 4 if our altar is level 8. So I still grab it because the 3 extra dexterity is still really good. We want as much dexterity as possible, but I have put in a bug report, and hopefully they fix that, because ideally this is supposed to give us another 4th dexterity as well, but still grab that because we need it regardless. Moving on to the ranger tree. Point in dexterity followed by marksman. All damage dealt with ranged weapons is increased by another 10%. Pick up counter battery, another 15% to ranged enemies, so magic users and or flyers. Sharpshooter, all range damage is increased by an additional 20%. Eagle's Bane, damage against flying enemies increased by 30%. This is a really good one, obviously, for the dragon and all the whelplings. Skill Shot, all damage to an enemy's head is increased by another 20%. Bee Sting, when you draw your bow, you can slow fall and kind of go into a slow time state when you're aiming your bow and arrow and fire enemies from midair. This is really good when big groups of enemies try like bombarding you. You can just double jump and hover above their head. Ranger, really good. This gives 2 endurance, 2 dexterity, 5 stamina recharge, 5 critical chance, and 5 critical damage for our bow, followed by multi-shot. This is going to be key when using regular arrows. There's a 20% chance to spawn a flurry of arrows that spread slightly and basically shoots 3 arrows at once. Then we pick up multi-shot, which will add an additional arrow, so then you could potentially do 4 arrows. Adds a 25% chance to spawn another 4th projectile when multi-shot procs. The additional projectile actually doesn't subtract from your quiver, so it's basically like a free arrow. Then we want to pick up multi-shot trigger. Some people don't take this because they don't like wasting their magical arrows, but because the only special arrow we're going to be using is the stun arrow, and we want as many of those shooting out as possible, especially against the dragon, this is a great perk to take and pick up for that, and it's what makes that stun arrow so powerful. You build stun meter like twice as fast as Eternal Chain Lightning with this particular perk. That's why I take it. So really good for magical ammunition there. Then moving on to the Beastmaster tree, take the point in endurance, followed by Snake Eater and Mithridatist. This will give us a bunch of poison resistance. Next, the point in endurance, followed by Slice and Dice. Increase the damage of your next bow attack after by 50% after a critical dagger hit with a dagger. Then Dagger Master, increase damage dealt with daggers by 15%. Then we're going to pick up Poison Blades, which will increase the chance to poison enemies to 25% when using daggers with the Poison Blade perk. And as you saw with our special dagger that we're going to be using, we have Crystal Knives that has double Poison Blade perks on it, so really good for poison damage there. And that particular poison perk is what makes that dagger so good, followed by Poison Mastery, which will increase the damage dealt with Poison Blade dagger perk by 100%. So you're basically doubling the poison damage that you get with that dagger. So between these two, that is how the crystal daggers end up out DPSing the Oathbreakers on certain enemies. And then last but not least, we take the point in dexterity. We are missing 1 point in dexterity here, but the 2 other perks that you have to spend points on to get there just isn't worth it. The points are better spent in other places. Plus, with all our food items, we end up with 29 dexterity anyway, so it doesn't even matter. Then moving on to the survivor tree. Take the point in endurance followed by runner and double jump for better stamina and traversing the terrain. Point in endurance followed by wanderlust, stamina consumption when sprinting on dirt and stone roads is going to be more efficient. Next, pick up good metabolism, health, mana, and stamina orbs get 30% instead of 10%. We will be taking a perk that can spawn stamina orbs, so that'll make them a little bit better. But you also get a nice 20% bonus to your mana and health potions, which is always good. It's like a free upgrade from a lesser version. Lastly, pick up rebound for 50% base stamina regeneration. Then on the other branch, we want to take Swift Shot Sustenance, 30% chance to spawn a stamina orb when defeating an enemy with a bow. Arachnoid, 20 or 50% reduction in stamina while climbing, followed by the quick point in dexterity, and then lastly, Dessert Stomach. This is the perk that allows us to have the 4 food slots. Then we want to branch out over to this side and pick up Backstab Mastery. All damage from the back is increased by another 30%. So you combine that with Backstab damage, and we're getting, 30, 40, 55% bonus backstab damage whenever attacking an enemy from behind. So really good with our bow and our daggers. And then lastly, for finesse, this is good because one-handed melee weapons and daggers have a 20% chance to not lose durability. And because we're swinging so quickly, dagger durability can drop pretty quickly. So this helps mitigate that a little bit, and you don't have to repair as much. So that's why I grabbed that. So now, once all of our dagger damage upgrades are taken care of, all of our bow damage upgrades are taken care of, the only thing left to do is work on our durability. So let's head over again to the tank tree. We're going to pick up the 2 points in constitution for more health, followed by shiny plates. We are using that warrior chest piece, so physical armor will get 10% more physical resistance, making that piece a little bit better. Then we have heavy plates for another 10% mitigation increased from our armor in general. For those of you that don't know, the maximum damage reduction that you can get across the board is 60%. So if an enemy does 100 damage to you and you have 100 armor, you're still going to take 40 damage. That being said, with heavy plates, it will increase that mitigation by another 10%. So you'll have 70% reduction instead of 60, which will mean you only take 30 damage instead of 40 with a 100 to 100 ratio, just to give you an example. Just basically makes your armor more efficient, followed by another point in Constitution for more health, and then Tower and Warden for more physical and magical resistance. Tower, when 3 or more enemies are within 20 meters, you will suffer 10% less physical damage, and then with Warden, when 3 or more enemies are within 20 meters, you'll suffer 15% less magical damage. Pick up the point in Constitution for more health, and then we gotta take Earth Aura. I had this in my wizard build as well. Shield allies and yourself, reducing income and damage by 10%. This again is amazing because it doesn't require any other things to proc it. It is just passive and with you at all times. When you're running around and you see the shields that pop up, should pop up at least. Don't know why it's not. Maybe because I don't have an enemy nearby. There we go. You see those little shields spinning around? That is the Earth Aura. So it's just a flat 10% damage reduction across the board for you and all your allies. And then last but not least, we got to pick up Thick Skin again. You will gain 1 Constitution for each 2 levels of Flame. Again, I found out this is actually bugged. We're only getting 3 instead of 4, but I have sent in the official bug report, and hopefully this gets fixed soon. So a nice chunk in health there as well. So as it stands, before we get into the damage test, let's go over our attributes. And again, for that skill build, I will have the first link in the description for the web UI with this entire build mapped out and able to zoom out and use as a cheat sheet. So feel free to check that out and rebuild this on your own a little bit quicker using that little reference guide. But moving on to our attributes. One thing I do kind of want to show off is what this build has when you're fully buffed. So let's go ahead and pop these. We got 4 food items now, and they drastically increase our stats. So going over for the basics, we're sitting at 20 Constitution, so a ton of extra health. 9 Spirit, not really important because we're not a magic user. 21 endurance, so insane stamina pool. Strength, not important. And dexterity is at 29. The reason why I say strength is not important is because a few people that I saw were taking strength to try and upgrade the damage for the daggers in their build. However, even though the daggers are labeled as melee weapons and the strength bonus says increase melee damage by 5% per attribute point, strength does not affect daggers. Daggers damage scales off of dexterity, so you want really high dexterity if you're using daggers, and don't waste any points in strength whatsoever if you're using daggers. It will not boost your damage at all, even though the tooltip says it's a melee weapon. For whatever reason, when it comes to calculating damage, it is not considered a melee weapon in terms of strength. Damage is what increases the damage, or dexterity is what increases the damage for daggers, so just keep that in mind, and we have plenty of it. We're getting 5% for every point of dexterity for both our dagger and our bow. So if I just open up a calculator real quick, just so I don't have to do the math, just to give you guys an idea, 29 dexterity times the 5% bonus is 145% extra damage that we're getting with our bows and daggers with all the dexterity we're getting, which is pretty crazy. Moving on to damage, this is even crazier. We have 169% critical bonus damage with our bow, as well as 36% range damage. So same thing as our wizard build, but for bow and arrows now. We get the bonus to sneak attack, bonus to merciless attack, but we also get 65% bonus backstab damage from behind and 50% skill shot damage when we hit an enemy in the head. We also get 15% flat bonus damage to ranged enemies and 45% bonus damage, including the dragon, to enemies that are flying. Moving on, we get another 15% bonus damage with our daggers and 30% flat bonus damage with bows. So a ton of bonus damage across the different weapon types we're going to be using. For protection, we have 4 block and 27 parry. This doesn't really matter because we're not going to be using a shield, but we're sitting at 322 physical resistance and 247 magical resistance. So a pretty nice balance because of the armor choices that we picked, as well as 70% poison susceptibility because of the arachnid perks that we took in our tree. So we're actually resistant to poison as well. And then as it stands, when we're fully buffed and got all of our food items active, we're just shy of 1450 health. We have 280 mana, not a big deal, but we have 582 stamina, so you never run out of stamina, honestly. We get 153% range damage, so insane stats, and as you guys will see from the damage test with the dragon, I take the dragon down fully normal settings, no modifiers or anything, in less than 3.5 minutes. You burn them down super quick with this build. So that is all the attributes. That is the new broken hunter build for the Frozen Frontier update. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. If you do, be sure to smash that like button, comment down below. I appreciate all of your guys' feedback. Also, if you want to keep up to date with my future content, I will be making another build for the warrior as well. Consider subscribing and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss those updates. And then last but not least, if you want to join a killer community of like-minded gamers, feel free to check the links down in the description and join us on the Discord. We've got over 1,000 members in there now, many of which are playing Enshrouded. So hopefully you jump in and we see you guys around here soon. But until the next one, enjoy the little sub 4-minute dragon footage here, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.